What really truly qualifies someone to lead? I mean, is it just, accident of birth? Or maybe how much wealth they have? Or is it just raw power, the ability to grab it and hold on? For, well, most of history, those were pretty much the deciding factors, right? Authority was all tangled up with hereditary privilege. But then something changed. 14 centuries ago, a completely revolutionary standard emerged. It was this total rejection of, passing power down the family line or favoring your own tribe. And the core idea, the thing that really turned political thinking upside down was this: leadership isn't some prize you win. It's not something you inherit. It's a profound trust. At Amanah, and it's granted based purely on competence, integrity, and crucially, piety. Those three things. Welcome back to The Deep Dive. I'm your host, and I'm excited to get into this exploration of really foundational governance ideas. Today, our mission is very specific. We're doing a deep dive into the sources you sent us, zeroing in on 5 key cases. That's cases 71 through 75. And they all define what quality governance look like under this banner of prophetic governance, merit, integrity, and leadership standards. Now, these cases, they aren't just like philosophical wishful thinking. They offer a really precise, demanding blueprint for choosing leaders. Leaders who are actually meant to serve the people they govern, not just use the office for their own gain. It's not just history. It feels more like a manual for making institutions last.
Absolutely. And what's so powerful, I think, about this framework is how it brings together things that, well, modern systems often keep separate. You've got this deep ethical foundation, what the sources call piety and justice, combined with really high standards for, administrative skill, practical excellence. So we're moving past just nice-sounding morals here. We're looking at actual usable criteria, things that are still incredibly relevant today. Think about corporate ethics, how organizations are structured, even how we choose political leaders in really high-stakes situations. Yeah, this is a system designed not just for one amazing, charismatic leader. It's engineered for stability, for institutions that can endure for centuries. Governance built for the long haul. Okay, let's unpack this blueprint. And we really have to start with that radical break, the idea that defines the whole system.
Right, that radical break. It takes us straight to the core issue. Authority based on merit, not on your family tree. This is what cases 71 and 74 are all about. They hammer home this need to replace bloodline with, well, proven ability.
Exactly. Case 71, the one titled the merit-based succession case, It's just a direct challenge to that age-old tradition of dynastic politics. The principle is crystal clear. Leadership has to be based on what you can actually do, your skills, your knowledge, your track record.
Can you imagine the shockwaves?
Yeah.
Just picture it. A society totally built on tribal layers, where power and status were almost always inherited. And then someone says, actually, a common person with the right skills is more qualified than the chief's son who hasn't proven anything. That fundamentally attacks the entire social structure. It meant your family name or fortune couldn't automatically buy you authority anymore.
It really did. It was, in a way, an equalizing force because it opened up the potential for leadership to more people. It just shatters that illusion that power is somehow inherently yours because of who you were born to. The analysis in the source is unambiguous. Authority isn't inherited. It has to be earned through merit, competence, service. And that's just vital if you want real capability running things rather than just, privilege.
Okay, but here's something I want to push on a bit based on the source material. If you set up a system purely based on merit, and often demonstrating merit requires things like education, experience, access to resources. How do you stop that system from just creating a new elite, where privilege isn't inherited by blood, but by the wealth that buys the education needed to show merit? Does that make sense? How do the sources handle that risk?
That is the crucial question, isn't it? And it's one that a lot of modern meritocracies frankly struggle with. The key safeguard, which seems implicit in these sources, is tying merit directly to those Amanah standards we see in case 74. See, if merit was just technical skill, just knowing how to do the job, yes, absolutely, it could potentially be bought or inherited through opportunity. But the sources insist that true merit is a blend. It's technical capacity plus that moral and ethical grounding. So when the criteria explicitly include piety and justice character traits that wealth can't buy you, create a barrier. The wealthy but unethical candidate, they don't qualify, even if they have brilliant technical skills. The capability part, the standard is holistic. It acts as a built-in check against purely economic elitism taking over.
That makes a lot of sense. The merit has to be moral, ethical, not just about technical skill.
Got it. And this leads us perfectly into defining those standards more clearly, which is exactly what Case 74 does.
Right.
Leadership qualification standards. This is where leadership gets defined as that Amanah, that sacred trust.
Yes, Amanah, that word is absolutely foundational here. It's not just here's a job, do it. It's much deeper. It implies this obligation that's moral, spiritual, and administrative all rolled into one. The leader isn't the owner, they're a custodian of the people's well-being, of the state's resources. It's a heavy responsibility. And Case 74, as you said, it doesn't leave this vague. It lays out 4 specific non-negotiable criteria. These aren't like, helpful tips for leadership development programs. They're the absolute minimum requirements. The ethical firewall you mentioned earlier, we really should spend some time unpacking what each of these means in practice.
Absolutely. We need to. So the first criterion is piety, or you could say moral grounding, a strong ethical compass. This is about the leader's internal accountability, knowing they answer to something higher than just public opinion or, the next election cycle. In practical administrative terms, this translates directly into fighting self-interest. It minimizes the urge for corruption, for theft, for misusing public money. Piety acts as a kind of protection against ego and greed taking over.
Okay, so piety is the internal check. Then the second is justice. This sounds more external, operational.
Exactly. Justice is the standard for fairness in action. It means the leader has to treat everyone equitably. All individuals, all groups. Doesn't matter what their social standing is, how wealthy they are, what tribe they belong to. It's about impartiality. This is where you find the mechanism against favoritism, against cronyism. A just leader simply cannot make discriminatory laws or hand out contracts based on personal loyalty. Practically speaking, justice means setting up and enforcing the rule of law uniformly. No exceptions.
Right, no exceptions. That's key.
Then we shift slightly towards the functional side. The third criterion is wisdom. The source uses the term equal. And this is more than just being smart or knowing a lot of facts. Wisdom here implies sound judgment. It's the ability to look at complex situations, synthesize information, really see the long-term consequences of decisions, and make nuanced choices, especially under pressure. You could have a leader with great capability, technically brilliant, but without wisdom, they might win a quick victory but lead everyone off a cliff in the long run. Wisdom provides that strategic depth, that foresight.
Strategic depth, I like that. Okay, piety, justice, wisdom.
Yeah.
And the fourth standard is capability. This sounds like the more straightforward technical skill part.
It is. Capability is about administrative competence, having the actual expertise needed to do the job. The sources are very clear on this. The leader must have the necessary skills for the specific office. If the role involves managing a complex treasury, they need to understand finance. If it's leading the military, they need to understand strategy and logistics. You can't just appoint someone based on good character alone if they're completely clueless about the tasks involved. They have to be able to actually perform the job.
So it's the combination.
Yes. That combination is the genius of it, really. If you only select for technical capability, you might get a super efficient tyrant, or maybe a brilliant embezzler who knows how to cook the books perfectly. If you only select for piety, you might get someone very well-meaning, very honest, but totally incompetent, leading to administrative chaos. Case 74 insists all 4 must be present: piety, justice, wisdom, and capability, simultaneously. And the moment leader significantly fails in even one category, let's say they're wise and capable, but they start acting unjustly, favoring their own group, they've broken the Amanah, they've essentially forfeited their right to lead.
And the sources really emphasize the consequences of that failure, don't they? There's that explicit warning from the prophet that betraying this trust, this Amanah, it leads to destruction, not just political trouble, but destruction.
Right. And I think we should read that warning as almost an organizational prediction, not just a moral threat. If your system keeps selecting leaders who are fundamentally unethical, even if they seem effective for a while, think about the consequences. Public trust erodes. The fairness of the legal system collapses. Resources get siphoned off. Inevitably, the whole system starts to break down. That warning of destruction is basically the ultimate argument for why integrity has to come before short-term expediency. It's about systemic survival.
It really functions as a powerful accountability clause, doesn't it? It directly links a leader's ethical behavior to the stability of the entire state. Wow. Imagine if modern organizations had such a clear, holistic standard for choosing their leaders. You probably see far fewer of those catastrophic corporate meltdowns caused by executives putting greed ahead of ethics. Okay, so we've established who should lead, someone defined by merit, bound by these strict Amanah standards. But then the next logical question is, how are they actually appointed? If bloodline is out, what process makes the selection legitimate? And that brings us to Section 2. legitimization through collective input, focusing on case 72.
Yes, case 72, consultation-based transition. This tackles the how, the mechanism of selection. If leadership isn't inherited, it has to be delegated somehow. And for that delegation to be seen as valid, as legitimate, it can't just be one person deciding or someone appointing themselves.
Right. The sources point to consultation, Shura, as the required method, the standard way to appoint leaders. The big operational takeaway here seems to be legitimate authority needs community input. It has to be a collective process. This stops that scenario where, some powerful figure just stands up and says, I'm in charge now because I think I'm the most qualified. The process itself validates the merit.
Exactly. Shura institutionalizes that community voice. Now, it's important for us today not to immediately equate Shura with modern universal suffrage, like one person, one vote. That's probably anachronistic. Historically, Shura usually meant mandatory consultation among recognized representatives, people who were already known for their merit, their wisdom, their standing. Essentially, the council of experts who likely already met those Case 74 standards themselves.
Okay, so it wasn't necessarily a mass vote, but a consultation among qualified representatives.
Precisely. But the underlying principle is the same. The decision-making process must involve key stakeholders. It can't be done in isolation. And by mandating Shura, you achieve two critical things. First, you leverage collective wisdom. You bring more minds to the problem, hopefully avoiding the biases or blind spots of a single decision maker. Second, and this is absolutely crucial, you grant the chosen leader legitimacy. Even the most capable person needs the community's buy-in, their acceptance, to govern effectively. Consultation provides that buy-in.
That legitimacy is really the currency of power, isn't it? If a leader is just imposed on people, even by a small group, against the consensus of that consultative body, well, they start off with a huge deficit of trust and cooperation. I'm curious about the practical side of this, Shura. When this council of wise representatives got together, were disagreements expected? How did they ensure the final decision wasn't just, say, a 51% vote, but something more robust?
The sources suggest the process wasn't just a quick vote. It was often iterative, aiming for the best possible outcome. There seems to have been a strong emphasis on striving for consensus, or at least a deeply considered majority, rather than just a narrow win. Disagreement wasn't just tolerated, it was likely encouraged because it helped ensure all angles were considered, all potential problems aired out. The goal wasn't necessarily unanimous agreement every single time, but a final decision that was genuinely informed by the full debate and wisdom of the group. And having this structured, perhaps even documented debate process adds another layer of accountability. It's far more robust than just a power struggle behind closed doors.
Right. It avoids the simple power grab.
And if you connect this to the bigger picture, what Shura really does is mitigate the risk of dictatorship, especially during that vulnerable moment of succession. By spreading out the responsibility for selection and demanding a degree of transparency in the process, you anchor the leader's authority in the collective will, not just in their own ambition or force.
This principle translates so well to modern context. Think about a big company choosing a new CEO. If the decision is just made secretly by a couple of board members, even if the candidate is brilliant, people inside and outside the company, the market, the employees, they're going to question it. Was it fair? Was it transparent? But its selection follows a clear, rigorous process involving consultation with key stakeholders, maybe senior management, maybe even employee representatives. The resulting leader starts off much stronger. Their legitimacy is established. That really feels like the enduring lesson from Case 72. It's about process legitimizing power. Okay, so we've got the standards for the leader merit and Amanah. We've got the process for selecting consultation, Shura. But as we said earlier, leaders don't last forever. People come and go. The real test of any political system is whether it can outlive its founders or any single leader. And this brings us to Section 3, building sustainable governance systems. This covers cases 73 and 75.
Right. And Case 75, Governance Continuity Framework, lays out what sounds like a truly radical idea for its time. Designing administrative systems to be self-sustaining. Systems that operate independently of the specific ruler's charisma or even their physical presence. The whole goal was to get away from personality-driven governance.
Which was the norm for so long.
Absolutely. Throughout history, usually when the king or the strongman died, everything ground to a halt or descended into chaos. Decisions were personalized. Loyalty was to the individual leader. So when that leader disappeared, often the legal system went with them. The treasury got raided by competing factions. The military might break apart.
But this prophetic model, according to the sources, actively worked against that kind of decay. Case 75 details three specific areas, three core pillars that were deliberately set up to be institutionalized to ensure continuity. We need to look at these three: the Treasury, the judiciary, and the military structure. What exactly does self-sustaining mean for each of them?
Okay, let's take the Treasury first, the financial systems. Self-sustaining here meant creating formalized, documented rules for how revenue was collected, how money was spent, and crucially, audit controls. These rules and procedures were designed to outlast any single ruler's term. A leader couldn't just treat the state treasury like their personal bank account.
There were rules they had to follow.
Exactly. They were bound by established financial precedents and accountability measures. This separation, the Treasury as an institution, with its own rules, not just the leader's wallet, was key to ensuring the state's financial health could continue smoothly, regardless of who was at the top.
Okay, that makes sense for finance. What about the judiciary? The legal system? That feels even more critical, maybe more vulnerable to the ruler's personality. If justice depends on the leader's whim, it's not really justice.
Precisely. So for the judiciary, self-sustainability meant establishing a body of law, clear legal precedents, and non-arbitrary procedures for applying that law. And very importantly, it meant having independent judges who operated based on that established law, not just following orders from the executive. The system of law itself needed to be relatively fixed, stable, not changing with every new ruler. A leader could be replaced, but the rule of law itself had to endure. That provides predictability, stability for the whole society.
And the third pillar was the military structure. In so many empires, the army's loyalty was purely personal to the general or the emperor.
Right, and that's incredibly dangerous during transitions. So creating a professional, formalized military structure meant institutionalizing things like recruitment standards, a clear command hierarchy, logistics systems. These systems were tied to the state itself, to its defined laws and institutions, not just to the personal charisma of whoever was commander-in-chief at that moment. This is vital. It ensures that when a leadership transition happens, especially if it's a difficult or contested one, the state security forces remain loyal to the system, to the rule of law, not just to one faction or individual trying to seize power.
Wow. So treasury, judiciary, military, all designed with independent structures and rules.
Yes. And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, the emphasis on institutional stability meant leaders had to see themselves as temporary caretakers. Their job wasn't just to rule, but to build and maintain systems that would outlast them. Systems with checks and balances designed to function smoothly even during succession crises, which are, historically, the biggest stress test for any political framework.
But that stability, that smooth functioning, it completely depends on the system's ability to remember its own rules, right? Case 75, this continuity framework, it feels like it would collapse immediately without Case 73, institutional memory preservation.
Absolutely. That's the linchpin. You cannot have a self-sustaining system like the one described in Case 75 unless you have a reliable way to preserve and access the knowledge, the documented rules that govern that system. That's Case 73. Institutional memory is the engine of continuity. Without it, the system has amnesia.
And Case 73 makes it clear this wasn't just a good idea, it was a requirement. A mandate to document official records, legal rulings, administrative procedures, all for future reference. So the simple act of writing things down and keeping records becomes a crucial tool for stability itself.
Exactly. Why? Why mandate it? Well, consistency is the bedrock of fairness and effective administration. Think about it. If every new leader or every new judge has to reinvent everything from scratch, or worse, if they can just ignore or deny previous decisions because there's no record, you get chaos, inconsistency, arbitrariness. Knowledge transfer, which happens through well-kept records, prevents that. It stops people from repeating the same mistakes over and over. It establishes precedent, which is fundamental to the rule of law and basic fairness.
You know, I often think about this with modern businesses. Imagine a really successful company. The founder is brilliant, builds everything up. Then they leave, but they never documented the core processes, the key client relationships, the financial systems they set up. The next CEO comes in. Even if they're a genius, they'll spend their first year just trying to figure out how things worked, why they worked. They risk breaking something vital simply because the institutional memory was lost.
That's a perfect analogy. The memory of how the system works is just as valuable as the system itself. And beyond just consistency and efficiency, documentation provides that critical link for accountability. Remember Case 74, the demand for ethical compliance, the Amanah. Well, Case 73 ensures that the records exist records of decisions, of expenditures, of legal rulings. This means that past actions by administrators can always be reviewed. Leaders, even past leaders, can be held accountable against those documented standards and actions. It closes the loop on institutional integrity.
It really is an elegant structure when you see how the pieces fit together.
It is. The right kind of person, Merit Case 74, is chosen through the right kind of process, Shura Case 72. They operate a system designed to endure beyond them, Continuity Case 75, precisely because that system remembers its own history and its own rules. Memory Case 73. It's a complete cycle.
That comprehensive nature, covering everything from ethics to logistics, is what makes this material so fascinating. It's not just philosophy, it's a practical political theory.
Yeah.
Okay, let's try to synthesize the main takeaways now. We've pulled out 5 really powerful, enduring lessons from these sources from cases 71 through 75. First, leadership hinges strictly on merit, defined by ability, knowledge, competence. Not your family name, not inherited privilege. That's case 71.
Right. Ability over bloodline.
Second, consultation, Shura, is what legitimizes power. Authority isn't just seized. It's granted through a mandatory collective process involving community input that makes a selection transparent and more likely to be accepted. Case 72.
Process matters. Hugely.
Third, institutional memory is the key to stability. Mandating documentation ensures knowledge gets passed on, laws and procedures stay consistent. It prevents administrative chaos. Case 73.
They have to remember the rules.
Fourth, strict standards are the firewall against corruption. Leadership is that sacred trust, the Amanah, demanding piety, justice, wisdom, and capability altogether. Case 74.
The holistic standard, non-negotiable.
And fifth, governance has to be built for sustainability. It needs self-sustaining systems like those independent treasury and judiciary frameworks so the state runs on systems, not just the personality of the current leader. Case 75.
Build institutions, not personality cults.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when you put it all together like that, the synthesis really shows that this political framework demanded an incredibly high standard. It required this unique blend of, well, ethical purity and hardcore administrative pragmatism. Leaders had to be functionally excellent and morally sound, no trade-offs allowed. And the whole system was designed to keep functioning, optimally even, especially during those tricky moments of leadership change.
It really is a profound template for governance, one that puts function, ethics, and resilience way ahead of ego or entitlement. And it still feels like a serious challenge to how we often think about politics today.
It does. And, this whole deep dive, especially how strongly accountability and record-keeping are linked, it leads directly to a really critical modern challenge. We talked about Case 74 leadership as that strict Amanah, needing those 4 standards: piety, justice, wisdom, capability, check. And we talked about Case 73, the absolute need for institutional memory, for meticulous documentation to ensure continuity and accountability. Check. So here's the provocative thought, the question we want to leave you with. Especially thinking about our world today, the digital age. If leadership is this sacred trust demanding defined, documented standards, what's the most essential mechanism today? In this world of instant information, yes, but also mass data storage that can be vulnerable, and the very real threat of deepfakes, digital manipulation. How do we guarantee that the institutional memory itself remains incorruptible? How do we ensure that the official record, the record of decisions, the standards themselves, is universally accessible and completely trustworthy?
That's a huge question.
It is. The standard for leadership, as outlined in these sources, is clear. The battle now, maybe more than ever, is ensuring the absolute integrity of the record against which all leaders must ultimately be judged. How do we make sure that knowledge, that documented history, is eternally secure, so that leadership can always be held accountable by the people they serve back to those original documented standards of the Amanah?
That really feels like the ultimate test for applying Case 73's principle in the 21st century and beyond. The standard is timeless, but protecting the evidence, the record, that's the ongoing struggle. Thank you for sharing these sources for this deep dive. It really hammers home that central lesson. Leadership isn't a perk or a privilege. It's a trust, a sacred trust. And it should only be given to those who truly deserve it and embedded within systems robust enough to outlast any individual. Now, based on where your source material seems to be heading next, there was a preview section in the documents you shared. Our next deep dive might get into democratic participation and decision-making. It looks like cases 76 through 85 delve into specific frameworks for community voice and shared responsibility. We definitely look forward to analyzing those with you. Until then, keep digging and keep questioning.